Let's talk about Ender Magnolia. This is a follow-up to the 2021 Metroidvania Ender Lilies, which was a fairly solid title and one I recommend for any of you trying to scratch that 2D action-adventure itch. Ender Magnolia is currently in early access, and this is not going to be a recommendation video, primarily because there's just far too little content at the moment and I'm unable to justify spending $20 on a game that has under 3 hours of play. The intent of this video is to provide impressions on Ender Magnolia so far, and to also discuss the decision made by the developers to have the sequel to Ender Lilies, which was in early access, be in early access as well. I just think it's a curious choice. First off, I just want to point out that this game is really polished, and that's really surprising given that most early access periods are subject to a lot of jank. There's always some type of visual hiccup. There's always something that's like surprisingly wrong with the game. Sound can be missing, but that's just not the case here. You are getting a game that works as intended and has a relatively smooth experience. One of the things I really enjoyed was that the developers want you to be capable early. You were given the double jump and dash within the first 30 minutes, and the game just kind of takes off from there. Areas in this game are not only gorgeous, but they're easy to traverse and explore, and I really wonder how some of the existing areas are going to be expanded upon, because there were notes by the developer talking about how they may make changes and adjustments to these areas as the early access period moves forward. So I'm really interested in that. I like the fact that the map will keep an area gray until you find all the available items or hidden locations. Honestly, everything's just really easy to find, and I don't think this is a game you're going to get lost in. And if you happen to get lost, you're given the ability to fast travel early on, so you'll be able to jump from location to location pretty quickly, even if enemies are nearby, which I thought was interesting and I'm pretty sure is going to change as the period moves forward. Like all Metroidvania titles, eventually you're going to gain abilities that are going to aid with exploration. I learned the ground pound ability fairly early when I faced a homunculi, and I was pretty excited because I had noticed there were a handful of areas in which I could use this ability, and in my brain I was like, this is going to lead to somewhere new, let's get excited. Unfortunately though, because it's in early access, most of what I found were just simple upgrade stuff and resources, and it was all just like a really big tease, because as you progress and go through your map, you're going to see those locations clearly marked. And so when you see those things, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, this is going to lead to a brand new area, and I just couldn't help but get excited because I really enjoyed my time with this game. That being said, let's move on and talk a little about the homunculi. For those of you who did not play Ender Lilies, the main character cannot fight. Instead, they acquired spirits and they would utilize them in combat. And that's the same case here in Ender Magnolia, but instead you're recruiting homunculi on your journey and you just utilize them to fight. Each homunculi have 3 abilities. One is automatically unlocked, while the others require specific resources to unlock them. Once an ability is unlocked, they can be upgraded. I was not, however, able to find those resources during this period of early access, and I cleared the entire map. Each homunculi serve a different purpose. For example, Nola is your melee homunculus, Leto has powerful cooldown attacks, and Yolvon has abilities that can break an enemy's posture, which will stun the enemy and allow you to fall out for big time damage. And yes, that does include bosses. Each of their abilities can be mapped to a specific button and can be used in tandem with one another as long as there isn't a cooldown. It's a really cool feature, honestly. What I really like about this system is the flexibility. It really doesn't take too long to unlock the other abilities, and the game really wants you to switch it up when you get to different areas or you face different bosses. When you arrive at a different location, they will have different enemies for you to face that are specific to that location, and you can also pretty much guess what abilities the game wants you to utilize, as it will make your time easier. You can, of course, just use what you're comfortable with, but it is a game that provides this flexibility and shows you that there are benefits to changing up your strategy. Now, when it comes to overall difficulty, Ender Magnolia feels like it's on the easier side of Metroidvanias. And listen, it's early, but I like that because some of these games can be downright painful to play. Here in this game, enemies have clear tells, and the abilities you have at your disposal will allow you to maintain your distance if you don't feel like getting close. So if you just want to chip away just to break their posture, you can do so. Bosses fall under the same category, by the way. Each boss that I've encountered, whether it was a mid boss or a major one, had fairly easy tells. They're just a bit faster in terms of how quickly a projectile will get out, or how quickly they'll slash, or the area of effect, that type of stuff. But when you dash, those iframes are really lenient. So unless you're just completely overwhelmed, you might take some damage, and you have to remind yourself, your character does not fight for themselves. And regardless of the equipment you have on you at the time, you can be killed in 2 to 3 shots. Some bosses are going to have 2 phases, but from what I've played, the bosses only had like 1 new moveset when they hit that 2nd phase. There were some bosses that transformed, and that may give you cause for pause, but really as long as you time your dashes and use your abilities, they're not going to be too much trouble. Unless you're me, and you get greedy because you feel like you're just not doing enough damage, so you swing wildly in the hopes that you get the final kill before that boss lands their final hit. Spoiler alert, it really never works out in my favor. As I progressed through my playthrough, I became curious as to whether or not there were going to be difficulty sliders, and when I was scrolling through the game's options, it does appear that you're going to be able to change the difficulty in the future. But there was a recent patch as of this recording in which the developer had stated that Ender Magnolia has linear difficulty and it will scale. I just wonder to what degree, because you are fairly powerful early on and earning abilities doesn't take too much time. I understand that there is more than enough time for them to fine-tune combat and make it more difficult when the early access period eventually ends, but it's going to be interesting to see how difficult the base game gets, because early on, the challenge feels just a bit light. Outside of exploration and combat, you can really only like purchase equipment, rune slots, which are practically accessories, and enhance your character in homunculi. You can only commit to changes when you're at an area of respite, and it's pretty much just a rest area. And this game does a good job of ensuring that these areas aren't too spread out, so if you happen to find a new homunculi or new gear, it won't be too long before you can equip that new item or use new abilities. Side quests, they go hand in hand with exploration. So if you find someone that you can speak with out in the world, they will more than likely have a quest to complete nearby. And these usually involve defeating mid-bosses. But they were well worth it because the rewards were upgrades for the homunculi. So every time I went out and explored, I just prepped myself for a boss fight when I met an NPC in the wild. And listen, once they get defeated, you have a conversation, you gain some, new memories narratively, and then they end up in like the hub town, which I think is a nice touch. It really kind of showcases this connected world. And I think that's really fascinating to see how it's going to affect everything moving forward. Maybe we might get alternate endings. Who knows? So as it currently stands, I am really impressed by Ender Magnolia. I think it's a really polished title. I think that what's here is pretty fun. Challenge stuff aside, I don't really have much in terms of complaints, but I am curious as to how people feel about this being an early access sequel. And I'm asking this question knowing that the majority of answers are going to be because they had a successful early access period for Ender Lilies, and more than likely they want to see the community's input for this game. But I think that you don't really need to have an early access sequel knowing how successful Ender Lilies was. Knowing essentially what the complaints were for the first game and just really putting the game out and then having a demo. You could have just done a Steam demo and then had the game come out 3 to 4 months later, because that's essentially what happened with Ender Lilies. Its early access period was January 2021 and it finished in June 2021. So it was a 6-month period where the game really got to shift into focus. But usually for me, when I see an early access title, and even games that go into a sequel, it's like the roguelikes. Like there's things that are going to constantly be added and adjusted. You have these games that don't have set areas to explore or navigate. You have areas that are constantly shifting, things that are constantly changing. That's not the case here with Ender Magnolia. And here's the thing, I'm not against early access. I love it. I love watching a community grow with a game, but with a sequel, it's kind of weird because it's not like Ender Lilies didn't sell well. It sold 600,000 copies for an indie Metroidvania game. It was a pretty good success in my opinion, and it's just weird that you're dropping an early access period for this game as well, knowing that you have all that feedback for the first game. Maybe I'm just crazy, but I feel like with all of that feedback, you could have just applied it to the sequel, made your adjustments and changes, because this isn't really reinventing the wheel, it's more like an extension of it. Just have an open beta period or a closed beta period, however you want to do it. Let players get a hold of it for 3 hours, and then afterwards they can provide their impressions for the game. And I think that's going to satisfy the need for feedback. But maybe I'm just off base. I just think that when you have a sequel, and you have all that information and all that feedback, I don't know if you need to go back into an early access period. I don't know if you want to have people just get piecemealed the story again. Like, I understand that community involvement, but listen, just by playing the game, just by seeing it in motion, you already know that this is more than likely going to be an expansion upon the first game, and that it's going to end up great. But that's just my thoughts on it. Let me know what you think, because that's going to do it for this video. If you happen to like the content, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. I'm Ken for Pixelated Thoughts. Do yourself a favor and play Ender Lilies.